Okay, guys, we're back here. We're going to continue key issue number 3 in development. Starting when we already talked about primarily the fossil fuels right now and their importance and relevance, especially between developed and developing countries. Now we're going to look at alternative energy sources. Okay, two things I want to mention about alternative energy sources here at the top of number 3. The first thing is it refers to the attempt to focus more upon renewable than non-renewable resources. So that's the first thing you want to note about alternative energy sources is this emphasis to focus on renewable versus non-renewable resources. Okay, that's the first thing. In parentheses, please add this though, because it'll make more sense when we start talking about nuclear energy. Essentially, with alternative energy sources, I know I just said that the emphasis is on renewable versus non-renewable, but I'd rather you put down that there's in parentheses, a less emphasis on fossil fuels because they're trying to get away from fossil fuels or trying to be so overly reliant upon fossil fuels, okay? Because I mentioned that because nuclear energy technically, and you can write that now next to it just so there's no confusion, but nuclear energy is technically not a renewable resource, but it does serve as an alternative to fossil fuels. So it kind of fits in better if we say it the way that we did before. So even though we recognize nuclear energy is not a renewable resource, it does serve as a quality alternative to fossil fuels. Now, when I say it's a quality alternative, that's because of the sheer power that it possesses. One thing I found from your book, and you will probably have to write it down too in your key issue packet, is 1 kilogram of enriched nuclear fuel is 2 million times more powerful than 1 kilogram of coal. So essentially, if you just want to put that down, if we're looking at a kilogram of each type of power right here, 1 kilogram of nuclear fuel is 2 million times more powerful than 1 kilogram of coal. So again, you get an idea of just what an impact nuclear energy can make. We tend to see that nuclear energy, and this shouldn't surprise you, exists primarily in the developed countries of the world. Again, we wrote this down. Again, 14% of the world's power or world's electricity comes from nuclear energy, but you don't really need to write that down. But developed countries, 2/3 of the world's nuclear power is from developed countries versus the contrast of developing. So again, 2/3 of the world's nuclear energy or nuclear power is derived from developed countries, primarily, and you might want to put this in parentheses, Europe and North America. Okay, so when I talk about 2/3, we're essentially saying that there's 19 countries in the world right now that actually use nuclear energy to a fairly significant level. Those 19 are developed countries. We do have 11 countries that are experimenting and also trying to use nuclear energy. So the ratio is about 19 to 11. Therefore, we say about 2/3 of all nuclear energy comes from developed countries. France is one that we should probably mention. 80% of its electricity comes from nuclear energy. So out of anybody that depends upon nuclear energy for electrical or for electricity, excuse me, would be France at 80% of its electricity coming from nuclear energy. 50% of electricity, as you can see, I wrote right here, is in Belgium, Slovakia, Ukraine. So there are some things that we have here. So the sheer power and the amount of energy / electricity it can provide is quite useful and quite productive. What makes us a little bit nervous is that there are some concerns attached to nuclear energy. One concern is potential accidents, okay? Nuclear energy, it's got a better rap than it did when I was a kid, but nuclear energy, which I know you're all saying is a long time ago, but nuclear energy is a somewhat unstable energy in comparison to the others. So it's somewhat unstable. Next to potential accidents, you could put somewhat unstable in comparison to so many other energies that are out there. So again, yes, the power is there. It packs a punch, but at the same time, you have to be very, very careful. In 1986, I remember this well, you guys weren't around, but in 1986, there was a place called Chernobyl. Today it's called Chernobyl, Ukraine, in the northern part of Ukraine. At the time, it was Chernobyl in the Soviet Union. Regardless of that, Chernobyl was a former Soviet city. Again, a former Soviet city whose nuclear meltdown caused over 56 deaths and 4,000 cancer-related deaths. So they were able to trace 4,000 cancer-related deaths since 1986, and they believe that it was from the nuclear meltdown that occurred at Chernobyl. So again, Chernobyl is a former Soviet city where there was a nuclear reactor, but it had a nuclear meltdown, causing over 56 deaths immediately and 4,000 cancer-related deaths, not to mention the environmental and financial hardship that it caused as well. So Chernobyl was a site of a nuclear meltdown, a very, very significant situation, first with human life, and then we look at animal life, environment, and then also just the total cost associated with it. So that's one thing that's really kept people afraid of that. United States had a scare, but did not have a meltdown at 3 Mile Island in the 70s as well when we were using it. So there are some situations, in some cases, situations where if something goes bad with nuclear energy, it goes really bad. Mainly because of the radioactive waste. And that's another concern. Even if things don't go bad, we still have an issue with radioactive waste. Radioactive waste is a byproduct of nuclear energy. It's very difficult to dispose of and quite dangerous to have around as it sounds, okay? So a couple things I mentioned right there with radioactive waste, just make sure you know it's a byproduct of nuclear energy. It's going to happen. It's very difficult to dispose of. You really can't dispose of it. You can store it, and it stores for thousands of years. So that's going to take up land space, and potential situations could occur from there as well. So again, we're talking about a byproduct of nuclear energy, very difficult to dispose of, and of course, it's quite dangerous to have around for such an extended period of time. So there's another issue. Another thing with nuclear waste is we can draw plutonium from that. Well, I can't, but people can draw plutonium from nuclear waste, and that can be used to produce the weapons of mass destruction that you so often hear about. Again, you talk about a dirty bomb, for example. So plutonium from nuclear waste can be used to produce weapons of mass destruction, such as the dirty bomb scare, especially in this era and age of terrorism that's going on. Nuclear powers, I want you to list a couple of them. When we talk about nuclear powers, we're really talking about the 5 superpowers of the world, or the 5 nations that are always sitting on the Security Council when we talked about the United Nations before. But our nuclear, and that's why they're on the Security Council, is because they have a little bit more muscle in their flexing. So we're looking at the nuclear powers are the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom. So again, the United States, Russia, China, France, United Kingdom are all considered nuclear powers. India and Pakistan are up and coming nuclear powers. They're developing more and more weapons of mass destruction, you guys, which is a concern because these are 2 countries that do not have a very good history with one another, as we've talked about before. So there's some scare there, but you can simply, for right now, put up and coming nuclear powers. North Korea has a handful of nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction as well. And then, of course, there's everything that's in the news as of late with Iran. Again, Iran at times has been suspected of taking their nuclear energy and trying to actually turn it into a nuclear weapons of mass destruction facility. There's no hardcore proof on that. It's an issue that's going back and forth. So we are seeing Iran using more and more nuclear energy with the promise that they weren't going to convert it over to nuclear weapons. And again, a lot of politics coming into play right now, depending upon what your personal position is. But those are things that you can consider, again, as an alternative when we always look at that. Yes, Iran would have nuclear energy. Is there a fear, though, that they might take that energy and use it for something else? That's one of the concerns with nuclear energy, not just in Iran, but everywhere in the world for that matter. There's limited uranium as well, okay? So that's another thing that we want to be aware of. There is limited uranium, so it's not overabundant in regards to providing for that. Now, it only takes a small amount to really power some energy, but it might end up not being as a long-term a fix as we were hoping for with our energy or alternative energy sources issues that we have. It's also extremely expensive, and that would be the last thing that you'd put down. It's also extremely expensive, mainly because of the nuclear facilities and all the safety designs and mechanisms that you have to build along with it. So when we talk about expensive, the facilities are quite expensive to build due to the fact that there's so much concern with safety. So I think I saw in your book somewhere it says it costs a few $1 billion to build a nuclear facility. So it costs billions of dollars to build a high quality nuclear facility with every standard and safety issue and power mechanism put in place. It's going to be quite expensive to build. One-time expense is true, But again, looking at all those other concerns, you have to value, is it worth it or not? And again, that's for you, the future citizen, to help decide. Hydroelectric power, I think most of you know this one all the way probably back from elementary school. This is when you generate electricity from the movement of water. Just really quickly, I'll say it one more time, and you can probably already know the definition, but you're generating electricity from the movement of water. Second most popular source of electricity, believe it or not, in the world, not in the United States. So if you need to clarify that, it's the second most popular source of electricity in the world today. One of the things, this is one of those rare moments where we see actually developing nations are using more hydroelectric power than developed countries of the world. So 2/3 of the world's hydroelectric power comes from developing countries. Should not surprise us when we look at Nile River Valley and we look at the Zambezi River in Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa. Should not surprise us by any means in regards to that. So again, that's what we're kind of looking at with that. Brazil, when we talk about Brazil, again with Amazon, high developing country. So it is a developing country, but it's one of those high developing countries that gets 85% of its electricity from, again, from alternative sources, with hydroelectric power being at the forefront of that. Developed countries of the world basically is the remaining 1/3. Just doing the math, we mentioned developing countries are 2/3, developed countries are 1/3. Out of all the developed countries, Canada leads the forefront in that. 2/3 of their electricity comes from hydroelectric power. Again, should not surprise you with the many river systems that they have, Great Lakes, and again, dams and all those other, in the falls and everything else that can help produce mass amounts of hydroelectric power. So again, they lead the world as far as developed countries are concerned. The United States is actually the 4th leading producer of hydroelectric electricity, you guys, or hydroelectricity. They're the 4th biggest producer of hydroelectricity, but only 8% of the U.S. electricity comes from hydroelectric power. So even though it's the 4th largest producer of hydroelectric electricity, sorry about that, throughout the world, you guys, it only produces 8% of its electricity. Once again, you guys, that reminds us just how much more energy developed countries, especially the United States, uses in comparison to other nations of the world or other countries of the world. Biomass, again, is food, and this was something that was very popular when I first started teaching. It really hasn't gone anywhere dramatically since that time. There was this thought that you could get fuel from plant material and animal waste, and they can. So next to biomass, you can put fuel that's derived or that's the only word I can use, fuel that's derived from plant material and animal waste. Again, it was a very hot ticket item back when I was first entering teaching, just leaving college in the early 90s, but it really hasn't gone very far from there. And it's kind of a limited energy, as you can see, and I'll just turn quickly to it so you can check it out yourself here. If you look on page 324, and there's lots of things. Make sure you're always paying attention to these things. So you can see ethanol right here is being produced from sugarcane in Brazil. So again, you can take a look at that. But when it talks about this, there's 3 bullet points right here, and here's a good example of that hydroelectric power. But anyway, here's 3 bullet points right here that kind of defines why biomass really hasn't taken off like so many people thought that it would. And I might, again, I might suggest that you'll probably put those in your key issue packet, so not to worry about them getting into your notes at this stage of the game. So that's biomass. Wind energy. This is moving air that can be transformed into energy. Again, something that I'm pretty sure a majority of you in class are already familiar with. It's moving air that can be transformed into electricity, so that's what we're essentially saying right there. Again, referring back to our book on page 325, one page over. You can see there's a nice classes of wind power density, wind energy producing regions. You can see North Dakota is near the top in regards to strong enough winds to give us sustainable enough energy. And that's one thing, again, you're looking at northwest Minnesota right here. Large part of North Dakota, some real big hits in North Dakota, especially just slightly west of us here in Fargo as well. So when we take a look at that, you guys, when we look at wind energy, and for United States, make sure you refer back to that map on page 325. Understand that 1/3 of our country, this is pretty significant, 1/3 of our country is, when I say our country, the United States, is windy enough to draw significant amounts of energy. So 1/3 of the United States is windy enough, or the wind is powerful enough and consistent enough to draw significant amounts of energy or electricity for us that we can convert into it. Geothermal energy, again, you guys, whenever I think of geothermal, I think of Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. This is natural hot water or hot steam that's converted into energy. So again, a lot of homes, again, I mentioned this with Iceland, its capital, the capital city of Iceland, or Reykjavik, if you just want to write that in, either or is fine with me. Almost all the homes and buildings in their capital city are heated through geothermal means or methods. All right, so almost all the homes and buildings in Reykjavik are heated via geothermal means or methods. So you can put that down as well. Last one is solar energy. This is the ultimate renewable source for sustainable development. Your book says that. I'm saying it word for word because it's a perfect description of what solar energy is and what solar energy could be. All right, to be quite honest with you, I think in the United States it's like 1% of all energy gathered here in the United States. 1%. Maybe it's not the United States, excuse me, in the world is 1%. When you look at all the energy that's driven from all the different things we talked about, solar energy sits at 1%. So the ultimate, not so much for what it's doing right now, but what it could potentially provide. And that's what we mean by sustainable development. This is an energy source that's going to be around longer than any of the other ones that we mentioned. So it's the ultimate renewable resource for sustainable development. Please write that down. That's solar energy. More about it, and what we're essentially saying is, in that statement, you can just simply copy as it's written right here. It's more about its potential than its production. Right now, it's not producing a lot of the world's energy, okay? But it does have significant potential to do so. And we are trying to move in that. When I say we, many of the developed countries of the world are trying to move in that direction to see how we can make it more useful and more practical and more efficient and less expensive. Passive solar energy, active solar energy, two things that the sun does in regards to energy. When we talk about passive solar energy, we're talking about solar energy that is captured without using special means. You're not doing anything special, and you're still getting energy from the sun. So this is solar energy that is captured without using special means of any sort. This is, well, I'm going to bring up a personal one. Well, one says large south-facing windows and allows to heat that part of the home based on conduction and the flow of air and all that good stuff. Illumination through the windows. Our neighbor just gave us, so we bought a house here in North Fargo, and we have a basement, but we have like part of the main level floor is wide open, and then we have a really, really big bay window, or really, really just tall windows that are right there. What happens on the south side is the sun comes in, can warm the house to some degree, but what it really does is it comes in and it illuminates our basement. So dark areas of the house, based on how the windows were constructed here, can light up what would normally be a darker basement or many lights needed, and it ends up being lit up. So I experience that every day, and I'm looking at it as I'm giving you the podcast right here. Dark clothes, wearing dark clothes also attracts warmth. One of the things that people always notice is people are usually wear darker clothes based on trends, again, and culture. People tend to wear darker clothes in the cooler months of the year than in the warmer, because, again, the sun will naturally attract itself to darker colors, thus heating up the body in some way, shape, or form. Active solar energy, you guys, a little bit more common in what you'd expect us to be talking about with this chapter, is the capturing of solar energy to create either heat or electricity. So you have to capture it and then transform it into some sort of official heating system or electricity of some sort. So again, this is when you capture solar energy to create either some sort of heating system or mechanism, or just to capture and to produce heat or electricity. Solar panels on homes are the best example I can think of. There's other things right now. There's batteries out there. Your book talks about one concept in which they do that as well. So again, there's a lot on solar energy, but I think we really captured the piece of it is the fact that it's a powerful, sustainable, renewable resource. We just have to figure out how we can make it best fit where we are right now in our world, as far as being efficient, powerful, not too expensive to produce that type of energy. There you go. There's alternative energy sources. That concludes key issue number 3. Again, with the emphasis talking about how energy and development go hand in hand with one another. With that being said, we'll look forward to key issue 4 coming up real soon. Have a great night.